So I don't care what anybody says. Having kids is an economic cost, and you shouldn't have them as an individual. I know lots of people are going to crap on me for saying this, um, but I want you to listen to what I'm saying, and I want you to pay attention. There is no framework that we have that I know of that can justify at the individual, at the person level, the cost of actually having kids. And it is just a pure cost, everything about it. And there's some people that balance this in different ways. Lots of people choose never to have kids because of that, and that is completely fine. There is people, and I know it's very common with some professions. My profession is probably one of them. It's very common to have one parent, very stereotypical in terms of the sex and gender of the parent that works, and then there's a parent that stays at home. It's changing a little bit, um, but when you balance, me and my wife try to balance as much as we can in terms of the parenting. Um, Depending on what day and who you talk to, we would probably argue who does the most amount of parenting in terms of doing it. And that parenting is a cost. We have to often we have to walk away from work, from doing things that we love to do, and both of us feel very passionate about our careers. It's something that we invested a lot of time and effort into our careers. Um, we're both equally qualified, I would say, in our careers, and we have we have two kids with a variety of personalities and traits and all these different things. We're very very different kids in a lot of respects, but very very similar in other respects. But they require equal, sometimes more, depending on what the time is, amount of effort and taking away from doing things that we love to do. And whether it's paying for food, paying for a larger house, all those kind of things is um, it's a cost, right? Everything about it is just pure cost, and there's no framework that I know of that can justify from an economic viewpoint why you would actually want to have kids. There's very little. There's no sort of financial return. I am convinced that I have not. Maybe there's somebody out there that has a good economic rationale behind it. I know that there was some papers or a paper years ago by an economist that looked at the number of kids that you actually have, and eventually you kind of run out because it gets expensive. You can't justify having 30 kids anymore. But in general, there's not really a good justification of why we actually do this. The only explanation that I know of, and it comes out in different ways, is that you love people, you love humanity, you love the world around you, and you can call it in different ways. Your legacy, right? You don't want your evolutionary DNA to stop. Um, your your yearning, you could call it that, I guess, right? You're yearning for whatever it is to be loved and all of that kind of stuff. Um, your, maybe it's stupidity for a lot of people. Maybe it is stupidity that they make a mistake and then they have to figure out how to raise this this being. At least in my case, in my me and my wife's case, it was very much a decided upon thing. It was very scary. When I did it, or when we sort of decided to do it, we're like, okay, let's jump on this thing, and it's scary, but you know, I wouldn't have, and I so first of all, I wouldn't have done it any other way, and at the same time, you feel and you understand that what you're doing is always a cost. There's this one of my favorite movies of all time is Marley and Me. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this scene because I see it where there's two friends. One friend chooses to go and pursue their career and become a successful career and all that kind of stuff, and then there's one that decides to get a dog and then decides to get a family and build something. And there's a scene towards the end of the movie where the guy that had the family is reconciling this, bumps into the guy that does the career on the street and is reconciling this and feeling it. And it really plays the situation quite well. Both paths are, equally fine, but they're very different in terms of what you do. One is very much a one feels like so they're both on equal sides, right? Like there's very little I couldn't, one of them you do sacrifice. You have that decision. I'm not going to have kids so I can build on my career. That's important to me. Um, but on the other side, you say I'm going to have kids so I can build a family, and that's important to me. And both of those, they're equally right. And there's no justification that I know of that can frame it as such that there is an equal right way of doing things. If I was to take an economic, let's say more financial perspective, there's no justification ever. It doesn't make sense. Even if you're in the right country, and there's maybe some countries out there that look after your kids and give you a whole bunch of extra resources, all that kind of stuff, it's still a cost. You're still spending time away from economic means, from things that are generating wealth, that are generating prosperity for you. And there's no justification. And economists will even say this, right? Like bump into a lot of people that have that training and they'll just say, well, there's not really an explanation. So, or we can't apply economics. That was actually a really big thing for a long time, is like, can we actually, lots of people take offense to that, right? Applying economic analysis to these kind of decisions. But this is a real life strategic decision that we all take. And it's strategic even for the perspective of a company. That's what I study. Because it has long run implications in terms of what you actually do. If you're a manager, if you have kids, depends on how you handle things. If you have people in your company that has kids, very different than if you don't. You'll see very, very different. Particularly Silicon Valley kind of goes through this as they these companies mature. A lot of the growing pains at Facebook and Google and all that, you could see that it's very much having to do with this decision. How do we deal with people that have to make this hard decision where they step away at 5 o'clock to go spend time with family? That is a cost. That is a cost that not only the individual bears, but the company bears, because they're not going to stay there and make as much money. So how do you handle this? Right? What is the big thing? The big thing for me is to know that, I'm agreeing with the economic viewpoint that, there's more to life, that there are these things that are called love, there are these things that are called legacy, there are these things, the only rational analysis that I can take is more at the it's more at the economy level, it's more at the evolutionary level where people do these things, right? Like, you do this to propagate the species, you do this because it's healthy for the economy. But from the individual, from the company's perspective, it's always a cost. And so what you have to do for yourself is take a step back and say, I love the world. And this decision that I take and all of the things that I do, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't be helpful for you today. I can't do this. But I need to be there at this moment for my kids. Or um, I need to be there for somebody, whoever that might be. And it's a hard decision. There's no right or wrong with any way that you do it. The only wrong that I would say is that if you choose to have kids, you better damn well be there for them. Um, but all of this, and then there's laws, by the way. You can't just abandon your kids. You can't just have kids and abandon them. Um, but all of this is to say that we not only we have to actively decide that this is an important part of our lives. It is, but it's also a strategic part of the lives of yourself, but also the lives of everybody else around you that you're surrounded by within your workplace. So that means if people are stepping away, you have to take a step back and say, it's as best as they can do. I think that that is the key thing to always think about, right? That there is not, and I really, I detest now the logic of optimization, performance, all that kind of stuff, which is deeply woven into everything that I teach about in the business school. And it's all within the logics of everything um, all within the conversations of everything that we teach about, that we talk about. It's all about optimization. It's all about getting there. The closest that people will talk about is satisficing, which is a Herbert Simon idea, which is you just do the best that you possibly can given the choices that you have. And you're like, that's good enough. But this is a bit different. This is, you actively choose things for love, for legacy, for things that are extraordinarily squishy, that nobody's ever going to know what the right answer is. And that's the one thing that you will realize when you get to this level, is that you have to be not only tremendously forgiving of yourself, but tremendously forgiving of everybody else around you. And not only just forgiving, because that is viewing it in a very negative way, but also encouraging and supportive and telling people that it's okay to go and do things for their family. I wish, I wish that there was better ways of doing this, right? But there's ultimately, at the end of the day, there's ultimately responsibilities that you have that are extraordinarily, not only obligations in the way that, like, this is horrible, right? Like, I have to do this thing. No, it's actually something that is a gift. It's a beautiful thing to waste money, to have an economic cost, to be a troublemaker with the whole system. It's actually completely beautiful. with what you're actually doing. And I want you to really internalize this with almost everything that you actually that you end up doing. You have to change the conversation that goes on around you, but also in your head, right? That people want to show up. They want to do work. They're not they're not silly goofs, but they're torn inside. They're looking at this and they're saying, I have these really big obligations that matter. And you have to turn it around and say, you know what? It's not an obligation. It's a joy. This is the things that we actually live for. This is the only reason why we actually do things, is to make other people joyful. Now we can choose the degree of how global versus local you're going to focus on with joyfulness, right? Of spreading joy, making people feel good, actually really being there for somebody. What do I mean by that? Well, the local is you're going to focus on one or two people, maybe even just yourself at a given moment, right? Lots of people do that with, maybe they get into drugs, for example. They're sort of chasing the very immediate local sort of joy that happens, or whatever you want to call it. I like joy. I don't like happiness because I'm not always happy. I'm grumpy. But I do things often when I'm grumpy. I'm sort of seeking that I'm going to eventually be joyful. But at the long term, you can also choose things that are much more sort of global or bigger, that are tackling things that really move the needle for a lot of people, right? This is where you become a prime minister or a president of a country, knowing that it's going to be a cost to your family, right? It impacts a whole bunch of people, but one would hope that you're doing this to spread joy, to make sure that things are going to do better in the long run. However that might be. I know we sort of have disputes on what that actually looks like, but it's really thinking about often taking a step back and saying, you know what, this economic logic that we have, this economic, let me take a step back. There's a difference between the economy and the financial logic. The financial logic that we have is about maximizing the amount of resources that we have at our fingertips. What if the conversation was, how can I just spread more joy? How can I love myself more? And I know that's like there's no financial economist that ever say that, right? Like I think that is silly, but I think it's actually the point. I think that is truly the point. It has little to do, in the end, what we actually do, and what I teach, what I look at, what I experience has nothing to do with sort of financial returns and all that kind of stuff. But it's, how can I make the world more joyful? How can I make myself more joyful? And the way that we get there is by thinking about using these tools of financial ways of thinking about things, but it's very imperfect, and they're actually horrendous sometimes. They make us do really silly, stupid things. That logic of efficiency, the how much we can get things done, often leads us. We've had many moments in history, very dark moments in history, where we've used that logic, and it's hurt us dramatically, and it's been a blight for us as humans. Not going to mention them, but there's many moments like that where we focus on how can we get more, how can we, make more money, all those kind of things. The efficiency is harmful. So what I would pursue and what I would get you to encourage to think about is that these are not costs, right? These are joys. These are the moments that matter. And those things are very difficult to ever put an economic value on. I don't know, there's an easy exercise that a lot of people do in sort of the economic viewpoint is how much money would it take for you to give up your son or give up something, right? Like that's the test, and you sort of experiment to see at what point that would, what is the most amount of money that you would be willing to take to give up your son or your daughter. It sounds cruel, but it's used in other contexts, and you can use it in this context. For example, I've seen it used in terms of the internet, how much money it would take to give up the internet. So, at least for me, that value would probably be pretty close to infinite. Maybe even infinity. There's nothing that I would ever want. There's nothing in this world that I would want that would allow me to give that up. So I think all of these things that we have in our world that matter, that really truly that matter in our lives, they don't fit in any of that thinking that we have. And if that's the case, why not change the conversation? Why not start talking about things like love? Why not start talking about things like caring for others? Why not think about things like sacrifice? These seem more important to me in a very deep, real way than anything else that you can ever talk about in terms of moving up in this world and success and careers and anything like that. And I think I would get you to look around to all of the people in your lives. When you look around, you will see that very few people actually abide by the logic of money, financial returns, all that kind of stuff. And most people, for the most part, they start thinking about love and sacrifice and doing things because they can't explain it. To me, that's actually more about the point of why we actually do things. It's because there's many things in this world we can't explain. That's why for many years, and even today, for millennial, we have different beliefs that have emerged where we try to explain things and put some sort of rationale around why they happen, but it's often nobody knows. It's the mystery of why these things actually happen. And to me, that mystery, the joy that you feel when you actually have to do sacrifices, and that includes your individual and companies as well, when you can raise up families so that they become more joyous, more beautiful people. Beautiful in the sense that their heart is beautiful, not beautiful in the outside. The more that you could do that, the better off that we actually are. And all of that has a cost. All of that's expensive. There's no way that you'll ever be able to justify it. But you do it because it's important. You do it because somebody's in need. They're there. And you're going to sacrifice to make somebody else feel joyous inside. Take care and have a wonderful day.